Good people, I am pleasantly surprised to say that the new cases coming out from Corsair feel refined. It's like they've noticed they need to step up their game because competition is very fierce, and you can feel that both from a build quality perspective and the assembly perspective as well. Like the frame and all the manufacturing feels so different. All the solid panels on the exterior are super chunky, extremely heavy, and way different from the thin the thin sheet flimsy piece of metal that we're used to. For just these two panels, it's like a wrist and an arm workout at the same time. It's very different. They even made sure to put a heavy sticker on the 6500 enclosure, the ATX version of the 2500, as a warning, and I can see why. As a fun tidbit, they left a supply sticker on my cases, and looking them up, it's the same producer that makes cases for Cougar, which kind of makes sense why the thick metal pieces felt familiar to something like the Cougar Conqueror. Although with Corsair, they are steel and not aluminum. Now the 2500 is the current answer to the growing popularity of micro ATX motherboards and enclosures. It is clear they want a chunk of that market, so let's see how they did, shall we, with the 2500. Now first, wood is getting extremely popular on PC cases. Fractal Design looking at you, starting that trend. Beautiful, thank you with the North and the Terra. And now Corsair is out here with these wood accessory panels. Now first, unboxing the wood panels, you can see they've sealed them very well, so they are protecting the shipment. We're not sure on how they're treated, and there is a big difference in the color and the texture and the feel of this wood versus something like the North or the Terra. First, the wood on the Fractal Design cases feels thicker, there's texture, it feels nicer to the touch, while on the Corsair panels, they are a little bit too glossy, they're a little too smooth, they don't feel like wood. Everyone who's seen pictures of this, they're saying like, wait a second, these are stickers, this is not really wood. And you know, at first glance, they're kind of right. Like the teak wood in particular, it's a little too saturated, it's too orange, it's too glossy. It's not my personal favorite. It's a little vibing with the 70s, with the furniture, with the wooden cars. The real shame though is the thickness of that wood piece, and because it's so thin, it appears like a sticker. Without absolutely any texture coming through, it is super smooth to the touch. And that's the reason why Fractal's wood accents look so much better. Not only are they thicker, but the wood pieces are specifically concentrated to the front facade, whereas on the 2500, having those 4 pieces, I feel like it's a bit too much. I actually think installing 1 or 2 complementing pieces is the way to go for a more elegant appearance, but Corsair made a big mistake by not matching the front and the top pieces in the grain, and therefore they feel out of place, especially at the corner where they meet. The walnut wood trim looks the best out of all 3. It's very similar in color and texture to Fractal. Although I do not appreciate the logo at the front, it looks out of place being on top of the wood. Here I also have the bamboo trim from the 6500, and it has a different I/O at the top because we have more USB ports on the larger enclosure, but the issue here is inconsistency in how the cutouts look a little bit jaggedy and not so smooth like on my 2500 wood trim samples. For science, I had to cut one of the pieces in half to see what is what, and it looks like real veneer wood, which is that thin layer of wood that goes on top of some plywood. It is very durable over time and will not warp or split, so at least we know it's not just a vinyl sticker. But man, they did not get the color on the teak right. It just does not look good, and for the $69 accessory, it is an insanely expensive DLC, so if you are buying, definitely go with walnut. Alright, enough about the wood, let's talk about the case, and there are a few things you should notice. So first, the fabric tab at the back on the top panel is too short and hard to grab, like 5mm longer, and this would not be a complaint. The same applies to all the metal extensions on the side panels, like they're way too short for comfortable use, and you can see the thumb screw for size reference. This is just weird cost-cutting measure. The top wood trim is only secured at the back, leaving a ton of wiggle and travel throughout the middle, especially visible when you unplug stuff from the I/O. Now, this is not an issue for the stock panels because they're insanely heavy. When reinstalling the front mesh panel, it all clicks in place just fine, but might appear misaligned at the top, and I found giving it a nudge from the bottom or the top seats it back in place properly, and this happens on both my samples. But man, do I love this ventilation pattern, especially the full mesh back panel that looks awesome. That is, if you don't mind how transparent it looks from the other side, so if you don't have anything populated on that side intake, it's kind of a gaping hole throughout your enclosure. Now, this
is clearly designed for microATX motherboards in mind, yet the cable routing favors the backwards facing connectors and not the motherboards you will actually buy. So I find the 24-pin and your front USB cables, for example, to travel a bit too long around that corner, which is strange because it enters the side intake area, and if you're running like push-pull or anything thick in that space, the connectors will definitely get in the way. This is a really easy fix from the factory if only they expanded the main cutouts here by just a few millimeters to allow the connector to pass through without removing the motherboard. Corsair, not cool, man.
By the way, a big one, the case does not come with a user manual, which is kind of unfortunate because I like to be able to like visualize my steps and what have to go in first and how to, let's see, operate with certain things on the interior. You scan the QR code and then you go through a little instructions manual, which is, in my opinion, way worse than your standard paper thing that you can refer back to instead of needing to rely on a web page that might not exist in the future. Now, the thing is, I don't want to discount what Corsair has done here because the 2500 has positive qualities. You know, the build quality is pretty decent, especially when all the steel panels are on. It's a very sturdy frame. As soon as you start to remove like the corner, for example, the things start to flex a little bit, but that's understandable. Aside from the really thick pieces of metal that you can remove to swap them for the wood, the rest of the frame is pretty thin and standard. Basically, it is the cooling capability of the 2500 that stands out, so you can install up to 11 fans, 2 at the front, 3 at the bottom and the top, 2 on the side and 1 at the rear. For the front intake fans, you cannot install them on the interior of the frame if you have the tubes routed like I have here, facing the front of the enclosure. You could rotate the AIO, but I do not like tubes that are exiting towards the rear at all. Both of my black and white models are the Airflow versions, which means that we have the front mesh, but there's a 2500X that gives you the glass front, and you would need to rely on the side intake for some additional airflow. And even though the bottom is, you know, fully perforated, there's a nice big dust filter and can support 120s and 140mm fans, I just find bottom intake, especially with current graphics cards, to be kind of useless. Luckily, both the side and the front fan brackets are totally removable, but the top one isn't, so that's something to keep in mind when installing your 360 AIO at the top.
There is something else to keep in mind with microATX motherboards, especially on AM5, is that the main PCIe slot is slightly lower, and therefore if you're using chunky cards, so like 3 slot plus, it will not let you install fans in the bottom of the case. You can see a standard 25mm fan does not fit, so you could always opt in for a slim fan at the bottom if you need additional cooling, but the case is quite large already, and I would say this is a big compromise.
You can tell there was a little bit more effort trying to optimize this case for storage. So aside from the traditional hard drive cage above the power supply, we have 2 SSD caddies on the side, which are, you know, tucked away. So if you need to access them, if you have the full side bracket populated, it's a little bit more tricky, but still it's nice to have that option.
Now, initially when I took the case out of the box, I felt like it was a good balance between what Fantex has been doing with build quality and what Fractal Design is doing with wood, but Corsair pulled a Corsair in the most Corsair way possible in the price department. So the standard 2500D Airflow or the 2500X is $159. That is a microATX enclosure without any fans for that price. It's kind of absurd. There's also going to be the 2500X RGB version that only has 2 fans and a link hub for $219. So that's a huge premium for just 2 RGB fans. What is really weird for me though is how it's part of the Link ecosystem, but they look nothing like the fans that come with like an AIO, for example. They look totally different and they are performance and whatever, but still in the visual side of things, I think Corsair dropped the ball here. Something I was not expecting to see is an SFX PSU bracket that is already installed inside the case. You have to remove it to install an ATX unit.
I would also say the biggest drawback would be cable management, not because of the motherboard cutouts and how they don't really accommodate a standard microATX motherboard normally, but at the back, even though we have a few cable tie points, you can buy these additional accessories for cable management that are optional on a case that is already so expensive. And I mean, just tucking your cables in an open area isn't really cable management, and they definitely should work a bit more on guiding you through the process of like, all right, this is where certain cables should go, but there is none of that. What there is a lot of are optional DLCs and accessories that you have to spend extra money. So these Elite panels are not cheap. There is a glass conversion kit in case you buy the Airflow version, but then you want to put a glass at the front instead. And even a motherboard side cover which again is like, why would someone buy that? Why shouldn't this be built into the case by default? That is the most Corsair thing they can do. Otherwise, the assembly was perfectly fine. It's just it didn't grab me, and the small details, that's where I was hoping for more refinement. It seems like there's definitely more excitement around microATX, and I would love to know if this is actually correlating to how you guys are building your PCs with microATX or ITX, because this thing can still support ITX, but I wouldn't even go that route. But it'll be still interesting to know if this is actually something that's correlated to market trends, or this is just a weird background trend in the case space. So yeah, I'm Dmitry. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the next video.